mansion of Richard Hale looked like something out of a dream. Tall marble pillars rose on each side of the grand staircase. Golden chandeliers sparkled above the polished floors. Everywhere you looked, there was a sign of wealth, paintings worth millions, statues from Europe, and glass cases filled with rare books. But hidden behind all this luxury was someone who never belonged to this world. Maria, the maid, worked quietly in the background, wearing her plain uniform, her brown hair tied neatly in a bun. She lived in the servants' quarters with her only daughter, Lily. Lily was a shy little girl, about 10 years old. She had big brown eyes and light brown hair that always fell into her face. Most people ignored her in the mansion. To them, she was just the maid's daughter. But Lily saw everything. She noticed the way people spoke, the way they moved, and even the way they played games. That night, the mansion was full of noise. Richard had guests over, other rich men and women in shiny suits and gowns. They sat in the library, a massive room with tall shelves that stretched to the ceiling. On a large wooden table in the center, a chessboard stood ready. Richard Hale, a man in his late 50s with silver hair and a confident smile, loved to show off. He was not just a billionaire. He wanted everyone to know he was smarter than them, too. And tonight, after too much wine, he was in the mood to prove it again. "Who here dares to challenge me?" Richard laughed, tapping the chessboard. "I'll make it interesting. Win against me, and I'll give you $1 million. The guests laughed. Nobody dared to play. They all knew Richard had beaten some of the best players in the city. Maria, carrying a tray of empty glasses, tried to stay invisible. But then Richard's eyes fell on her. "You," he said suddenly. "Maria, do you know how to play?" She froze. "No, sir. I don't." The guests chuckled. Richard smirked. "Of course not. Why would a maid know chess? Too busy scrubbing floors." Maria's cheeks burned, but she kept her head down. She didn't answer. Then out of nowhere, Lily spoke. Her voice was small, but it carried across the room. "I know how." Everyone turned. The guests laughed louder. Richard raised his eyebrows. "You?" he said, standing up and walking toward her. "The maid's little girl? You can play chess?" Lily nodded, her small hands clenched at her sides. "Yes." Richard let out a booming laugh. "This is rich. A child challenging me? Tell you what, sweetheart, let's make it fun. If you win against me—" He paused, looking around the room with a grin. "I'll give you not 1 million, but $100 million. The room gasped. "Richard?" one of his guests said, laughing. "That's insane!" But Richard only waved his hand. "Relax, she has no chance." He looked down at Lily, his smile mocking. "Do you accept, little one?" Maria rushed forward. "No, sir, please. She's just a child. She doesn't understand." "But—" Lily's eyes stayed fixed on Richard's. She didn't blink. She didn't smile. "I accept," she said. The room went silent. Even Richard seemed taken aback for a moment. Then his grin returned. "Fine," he said, pulling out a chair at the chessboard. "Come then. Let's see what the maid's daughter can do." Maria grabbed Lily's arm. "Lily, no. Don't embarrass yourself. Don't make him angry." But Lily shook her head. "Mama, I can do this." Maria's heart twisted. She had never seen her daughter so sure of herself. "Still," she whispered, "please don't." "Sit," Richard ordered, pointing at the chair. Lily climbed onto the seat, her small frame looking almost lost at the massive table. Richard sat opposite her, his eyes shining with amusement. The guests leaned in, forming a circle around them. Richard spread his hands over the chessboard. "Ladies first. Do you even know how the pieces move?" Lily didn't answer. She simply reached forward and moved a pawn. Her hands were steady. Richard chuckled. "Good. At least you won't embarrass yourself on the first move." Maria stood behind her daughter, twisting her hands nervously. She wanted to pull Lily away, but something in her daughter's face stopped her. It wasn't pride. It wasn't arrogance. It was focus. A kind of quiet strength Maria had never seen before. As Richard made his first move, he leaned back casually in his chair. "This will be over quickly." "You'll see." But Lily didn't look scared. She didn't look away from the board. And in that moment, Maria felt something strange in the air. For the first time, she wondered. What if her daughter wasn't just playing? What if she actually had a chance? The room buzzed with whispers. The guests couldn't believe what they were watching. The great Richard Hale playing chess with a 10-year-old girl, but no one could guess what was about to happen. What would you do if a billionaire laughed in your face and gave you a crazy challenge like this? Would you walk away or would you fight back? Keep watching to see what happens next. The library was silent now, except for the soft ticking of a tall grandfather clock in the corner. The guests leaned forward, waiting to be entertained by Richard's little game. Richard Hale sat tall in his chair, a smug smile on his face. Across from him, Lily sat small but steady, her feet not even reaching the floor. Maria stood behind her daughter, her hands trembling. "All right, then," Richard said, his voice full of confidence. "Show me what you've got." Lily studied the board carefully. She didn't rush. Finally, she moved another pawn forward. Richard chuckled. A safe little move. Cute. He countered with his knight. The game began slowly, with Richard making bold, practiced moves and Lily responding quietly. The guests whispered to each other, shaking their heads. "This won't last long," one man muttered. "She doesn't stand a chance," another said. Maria's heart raced with every move. She wanted to scoop Lily. "Out of that chair, take her upstairs and end this madness." But Lily's face stopped her again. She was calm, too calm for a child. "Come on, little girl," Richard said after a few minutes, drumming his fingers on the table. "Don't think too hard. You'll give yourself a headache." But Lily ignored him. Her eyes never left the board. She lifted her knight and placed it down with precision. Richard glanced at the move. For a second, he frowned. Just a second. Then his grin returned. "Not bad. Did Mommy teach you that?" "No," Lily said simply. The guests laughed. Richard leaned forward. "Then who did?" "Surely not your maid, Mother." Maria's face turned red, but Lily answered calmly. "I taught myself." The laughter grew louder. Richard shook his head in disbelief. "You taught yourself chess? By what, magic?" Lily said nothing. She made her next move. Richard followed, trying to keep the game playful, but the way Lily countered him began to draw attention. Her moves weren't random. They had purpose. She was defending strongly, not giving up any easy mistakes. A woman in a red dress whispered, "She's actually good." Richard heard her and smirked. "Good, please? I'm letting her play. Watch, I'll crush her in 5 moves." But as Richard moved his bishop, Lily immediately blocked with her rook. His confident grin slipped just slightly. Maria noticed it. Her heart skipped. "Lily," she whispered, leaning down. "Are you sure about this?" "Yes, Mama," Lily whispered back. "Trust me." Maria swallowed hard. She wanted to believe her. Richard cleared his throat, trying to regain his rhythm. Beginner's luck. That's all this is. He made another aggressive move. Once again, Lily countered with surprising speed. Now the guests weren't laughing anymore. They leaned in closer, eyes widening. "Wait," one man whispered. "She just took his knight." Another muttered, "That wasn't luck. That was skill." Richard's jaw tightened. Well, looks like the little girl has a trick or two. But this is where the fun ends." He launched a bold attack, pushing his queen forward. Gasps filled the room. Maria's stomach twisted. She thought Lily was trapped. But the girl's small fingers moved with confidence. She slid her bishop across the board. Everyone leaned closer. "She blocked him again," a guest whispered. "No way," another said. Richard froze for half a second before forcing a laugh. "All right, you're stubborn. I like that. But you're still finished." His words were loud, but Maria could see it, the flicker of doubt in his eyes. Lily made another move. This time, Richard leaned closer to the board, studying it longer than before. The room grew hot. Even the guests felt the tension. They weren't laughing anymore. They were watching, waiting. Maria's hands gripped her apron. She could hardly breathe. "Lily," she whispered again, "how do you know all this?" Lily's eyes never left the board. "I watch," she said softly. Maria frowned. "Watch? Who?" "You," Lily said. "When you clean in here, I sit in the corner. I watch Mr. Hale play with his friends. I listen. And when you give me your phone, I practice." Maria's chest tightened. Her little girl, who had nothing, had taught herself chess by watching others and practicing in secret. Richard made his next move, trying to look relaxed. But now he was leaning forward, elbows on the table, his playful smile fading. The game went on, back and forth, each move heavier than the last. The room had turned from laughter to silence. Finally, one of the guests whispered, "She's not just holding on. She's playing to win." Maria's breath caught. Richard heard it too. His eyes flicked up to meet Lily's. For the first time, his smile was gone. "Do you think the maid's daughter has a real chance against the billionaire? Comment yes or no right now before you see what happens next." The library felt different now. What had started as a joke was no longer funny. The laughter had died. The air was heavy, charged with something no one could explain. Richard Hale leaned forward, both elbows planted on the table, his silver hair catching the warm glow of the chandelier. His confident grin was gone. Instead, his lips pressed into a thin line. Across from him, Lily sat quietly, her small hands folded in her lap while she waited for him to move. Her eyes were sharp, calm, focused, not the eyes of a child at play, but of someone who understood the battlefield in front of her. Maria stood behind her daughter, her chest tight with nerves. She kept her hands on Lily's shoulders as though trying to protect her, though she knew she couldn't interfere. "Your turn," Lily said softly. Richard smirked, though his voice carried a touch of strain. "Don't rush me, little one. Strategy takes time." The guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some sipped their drinks, others whispered, but everyone kept their eyes glued to the board. Richard finally moved his queen, pushing it deep into Lily's territory. A bold move, aggressive and risky. He leaned back, trying to recover his swagger. "There," he said. "Let's see you get out of that." Lily studied the board without speaking. Her brow furrowed slightly, her lips pressing together in concentration. Maria's stomach knotted. "She's trapped," she thought. But then Lily's hand reached out. She slid her knight across the board, the click of the wooden piece echoing in the silence. The guests leaned closer. One man muttered, "Wait a second." Another whispered, "She's setting something up." Richard frowned. He leaned forward again, staring at the pieces. For the first time, he didn't move right away. His fingers tapped the edge of the table. Lily sat still, patient. Finally, Richard scoffed. "Clever, but you're still in danger." He made another aggressive move. Lily's hand moved almost instantly. Her rook glided into position, cutting off his queen's escape. The room gasped. Richard's eyes widened. "What?" He stared at the board, his face tightening. "She's trapped your queen," someone whispered. "No way," another said. Richard studied the pieces again, his hands gripping the edge of the table. His queen, the most powerful piece on the board, was cornered. No matter which way he tried to move, it would be taken. Lily's voice was quiet, almost polite. "Check." The word hit Richard like a slap. The guests were buzzing now, shocked murmurs filling the air. Maria's heart pounded. She bent down close to her daughter's ear and whispered, "Lily, how did you do that?" Lily's lips curved just slightly. "I practiced, Mama. Every night when you thought I was asleep. I used your phone to play chess games online. Hundreds of them." Maria's eyes filled with tears. Her little girl, in their small, humble room, had been teaching herself in secret. Richard's face flushed red. He picked up his queen, hesitated, and then set it aside. "Fine," he muttered. "You took my queen. Enjoy it while you can. The game isn't over." But everyone in the room knew the balance had shifted. The great Richard Hale, undefeated billionaire, had just lost his most powerful piece to a 10-year-old. Lily kept her focus, her hands steady as she prepared for the next move. Richard adjusted his suit jacket, trying to cover his frustration. "Lucky strike," he said. That's all it was. Beginner's luck. But Maria heard the slight tremble in his voice. The game pressed on. Richard fought harder now, his moves sharper, quicker, but also more desperate. Lily countered him every step of the way. Piece by piece, she cut down his army. The guests couldn't believe it. They whispered louder now, some even cheering quietly for the girl. Unbelievable. She's controlling the whole game. She's not just good. She's brilliant. Maria stood frozen, torn between fear and pride. She wanted to protect her daughter, yet her heart swelled at the sight of her holding, her own against the most powerful man she had ever known. Richard slammed his next piece down harder than he meant to. "You think you're clever, don't you? But you can't win. Not against me." Lily's eyes met his for the first time since the game began. "We'll see." The words were soft, but they struck Richard like a challenge. His jaw tightened. Maria felt a chill. Her daughter wasn't afraid. She wasn't backing down. And for the first time in his life, Richard Hale looked like a man who wasn't sure he could win. Can you believe this? A billionaire's pride is on the line, and a 10-year-old maid's daughter just trapped his queen. Do you think she can finish the game and win it all? Keep watching to find out. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Nobody moved. Nobody laughed anymore. The billionaire who once mocked the little girl now sat stiff in his chair, sweat glistening on his forehead under the chandelier's golden glow. Richard Hale's fingers drummed nervously against the edge of the table as he studied the board. His queen was gone, his advantage slipping away. Across from him, Lily sat calmly, her hands folded in her lap as though she had all the time in the world. Her brown eyes followed the board carefully, every move already mapped in her mind. Maria stood close, her hands pressed together as if in prayer. She didn't dare speak, afraid she might break her daughter's concentration. Richard finally moved his bishop, trying to open a path of attack. His voice was sharp now, no longer playful. There, let's see you answer that. Lily studied the move for a moment. Then, without hesitation, she slid her knight into place. Richard's eyes flicked to the piece and his mouth tightened. One of the guests whispered, "She's closing in on him." Another murmured, "This is unreal." Richard shot them both a glare. Quiet. The room fell silent again, but the tension only grew. Every piece that moved felt heavy, final, like a hammer striking a drum. Richard leaned forward, gripping a rook. "Check," he announced with a forced grin, pushing it aggressively toward Lily's king. Gasps echoed around the room. Maria nearly cried out, but Lily stayed perfectly calm. She reached for her queen's pawn, slid it across the board, and blocked the attack. The sound of the piece landing was like thunder. Richard froze. His lips parted, but no words came out. His rook was trapped. A man in the back whispered, "She's going to win." Richard's face flushed red. "No," he snapped. "The game isn't finished." He yanked his rook back, trying another path. But Lily's hands moved smoothly, almost like she had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. She placed her bishop, cutting off Richard's rook again. Maria's chest swelled with pride, though fear still gripped her. "Please, Lily, please be careful." The battle pressed on. Piece by piece, Richard's army shrank while Lily's control of the board grew. His rooks fell. His pawns disappeared. His defenses crumbled. Richard wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, his arrogance fading with every move. The man who once laughed at the idea of losing now looked cornered. Finally, Lily leaned forward, her small fingers placing her rook directly in line with his king. Her voice was steady. "Check." Richard's eyes shot to hers, wide and burning. He grabbed his king, scanning the board desperately. He moved it one square to safety. Lily didn't blink. Her bishop slid across the board. "Check." Gasps filled the library again. The guests leaned in closer. Some were smiling now, rooting silently for the little girl who dared to take on the giant. Richard's hands shook as he moved his king again. Lily followed, calm as ever. "Check." It was relentless. Every time he moved, she was there, pressing harder, forcing him into a corner. Richard's face turned pale. He looked less like a billionaire and more like a man drowning. Maria whispered under her breath, "Oh my God, she's really going to do it." Richard tried one final desperate move, pushing his pawn forward as a shield. Lily's eyes lit up. She moved her queen across the board, the piece landing with a solid click. The room went dead silent. "Checkmate," Lily said. The word hit like lightning. For a moment, nobody spoke. Richard stared at the board in disbelief, his hands frozen around his remaining pieces. His lips trembled, his eyes darting wildly. She didn't," he muttered. But the board told the truth. His king was trapped. No escape, no tricks left. The guests erupted in whispers and gasps. Some clapped softly, unable to believe what they'd seen. Maria covered her mouth, tears flooding her eyes. She pulled her daughter into her arms. "You did it, Lily. You really did it." Richard pushed back from the table suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He stood, his face ghostly pale, his pride shattered in front of everyone. You cheated," he stammered. "No," one guest said firmly. "She played fair." "I watched every move," another added. "The girl outsmarted you. Richard's lips pressed together, his chest rising and falling quickly. For once in his life, he had no words. Lily looked up at him, her expression calm but unshaken. "You said if I won, you'd give me $100 million. The words hung in the air like a sword. The great Richard Hale, billionaire, had been beaten by a child, the maid's daughter, and he had promised her everything. What would you do if you won $100 million in a single game? Would you take it? Would you walk away? Stick around, because what Lily says next will shock you even more." The silence in the library was heavy. Everyone stared at Richard Hale, waiting for his response. The man who once laughed loudly now stood frozen, his pale face caught between anger and shame. On the table, the chessboard told the truth. His king was trapped, his army gone. The game was over. Maria clutched Lily close, whispering through tears, "You did it, my brave girl. You really did it." Richard's jaw tightened. He forced a laugh, but it came out hollow. "Well, it seems the maid's daughter had her moment. But of course I was only being dramatic. $100 million? It was just a joke." The guests shifted uncomfortably. Murmurs rose. A man in the back spoke sharply. "No, we all heard you. You made a promise." A woman in a red dress nodded. "You said it yourself. Win this and I'll give you $100 million. Richard's face darkened. He hated being cornered, especially in his own house. His fists clenched. "This is ridiculous. She's a child." "You can't expect me—" Lily's small voice cut through the room. Calm, clear. "You don't have to give me the money." The room went still. All eyes turned to the little girl. Maria blinked. "Lily, what are you saying?" Lily looked straight at Richard, her chin lifted with quiet strength. "I don't want $100 million. I don't need it." The guests gasped. Richard frowned, confused. "Then what do you want?" Lily's voice didn't shake. "I want you to respect my mom." Maria's breath caught in her throat. Tears blurred her vision. "You make fun of her," Lily continued, her eyes never leaving Richard's. "You act like she's nothing. But she's everything to me. She works hard every day. She takes care of me even when she's tired. She gives me love when we don't have money. She is worth more than your gold and your houses and your cars." The room was silent. Some of the guests lowered their eyes, ashamed. Richard's mouth opened, then closed. He had no smart reply, no cutting remark. For once in his life, words failed him. Maria couldn't hold back her tears anymore. She pulled Lily into her arms and kissed the top of her head. "My sweet girl." The woman in the red dress whispered, "She's braver than all of us." Richard sank slowly back into his chair. His chest rose and fell heavily. He looked at the girl, this child who had defeated him not just in a game, but in spirit. He rubbed his forehead, his voice low. "Respect, huh?" Lily nodded. "Yes. Treat her the way you treat your guests. That's all I want." The guests stared, waiting. Finally, Richard let out a long, shaky breath. His pride was shattered, but something else had cracked inside him, too. "You're right," he admitted quietly. His eyes shifted to Maria. "I've treated you unfairly. I apologize." Maria's lips parted in shock. She had worked in this house for years and had never once heard Richard Hale apologize. He cleared his throat, sitting straighter. "And while your daughter may not want the money, a promise is still a promise. A man should honor his word." He turned to Lily. "You will have the $100 million? Placed in a trust in your name. But I see now you're richer than I'll ever be, because you already know what matters." The guests broke into soft applause, not for Richard, but for the girl who had humbled him. Lily held her mother's hand. "I don't care about the money. I care about her." Maria pressed her forehead to her daughter's, whispering through tears. "You've given me more than money ever could, my love. You've given me dignity." For the first time in many years, Richard Hale looked less like a king in his castle and more like a man, just a man humbled by the truth of a child's words. The library, once a place of laughter and arrogance, had been changed forever, and so had Richard Hale. Remember this: never underestimate someone because of where they come from. True strength doesn't come from money, but from heart, courage, and love. If this story inspired you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And always remember, respect costs nothing, but it can change everything.